Oh boy. Okay, guys, we're just gonna get straight into it because there is a decent amount of speech here, at least like 18 to 20 minutes, something in that range. And while, you know, it's not like an hour long rambling Trump speech, I don't like listening to JD Vance talk because it always just feels so smug. It always feels so smarmy. He always feels so preachy. He feels like an elitist in a populist's clothing, which is, I mean, a lot of populists actually. But at the end of the day, he is the vice president of the United States. He went to the Munich Security Conference. He's representing the United States there. All of the European powers there. The German defense minister, the Canadian representatives, the representatives from all sorts of European nations like France and otherwise, European defense companies representatives. They're all here and they're waiting for any whisper of a smoke signal of anything that could be sent by JD Vance. The way he throws a cigarette outside is going to be read as a signal. And he decides to use this opportunity to do this speech, which was highly political, highly preachy, and everything I don't like about JD Vance. But we still need to listen to it because it could have important implications for two reasons. Number one, he's the vice president of the United States and he has the president's ear. And even though there's many other people who has his ear, so he's not the only influence, JD Vance is one of those people. And that does have some sort of impact. And number two, Donald Trump is 78 years old. By the time he ends his administration, he will be over the age Biden was at the time he ended his administration. And there's always the possibility that something happens and this man is now the most powerful man on the planet, or that he runs in 4 years. So, you know, listening to him outright is also important. So let's listen to Vance.
To talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples.
Thanks, Renegade.
To use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security. And normally, we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that
Hey, thank you so much for the sub, Ohms. I appreciate that. You know, something that feels like a fatal flaw of this Trump strategy here is I feel like there's some kind of contradictory principles at play. On one hand, Donald Trump seems to be completely like taking the lead when it comes to negotiating with the Russians, as in he talked to the Russians first before talking to the Ukrainians. There's a possibility, a scary possibility of them being boxed out. We don't know that for sure, but considering Trump's record, I mean, that is certainly not an impossibility And the way it started is probably not the way that the Ukrainians wanted it to start. The Europeans were also not at that table. And we really have no guarantee that there'll be any European representation at the negotiating table whatsoever, just like we don't have any guarantee when that comes to the Ukrainians. And so if you, on one hand, not including them in planning the future of Europe's security arrangements, which is going to be admitted to both Vance and Trump, mainly their priority. But the problem for me I see here is if he's trying to say that, hey, look, we're going to take the lead on this, we're going to be the ones planning the future of Europe's security, while, you know, they're also saying that it's mainly their focus, it's mainly their priority. That's not to say that's not an American priority as well. I do think that he's claiming that they care a lot, but their big point is always it's in their backyard, it's bigger threat to them. They should be the main ones footing the bill. They should be the main ones carrying it. But if they're going to be the main ones footing the bill, and they're going to be the main ones carrying it, it can't be the Americans also expecting the Europeans to come behind us on a leash in the way that, and I don't mean to be mean to the Germans, but in the way that America has kind of had a relationship with Germany in 20, 30 years, at least from the perspective of many Washingtonian think tankers or maybe military leaders or certain bureaucrats. As in, we make the decisions about foreign policy and the Germans kind of follow because we're the ones footing the bill. We're the ones for which their security is built upon. So they kind of just, allow us to make those types of decisions. If they're going to be taking a bigger role, we cannot expect that reciprocity if we start making decisions about going into Mexico or doing this or doing that, certain initiatives that Trump might want their support with. Or, for example, and this is probably the one that will be the most relevant in the coming century, say an economic confrontation with the Chinese when the European economies facing issues, especially the Germans when it comes to car manufacturing, would like some access to that Chinese market. It is quite a big market, and they would like to purchase goods from it. Point is, though, like, I don't think this matches.
Dealer got a tier 1 subscription.
If he announced, this is the missed opportunity at Munich. If JD Vance came out and announced that the $3.8 billion that is just sitting there in the presidential drawdown authority is going to be sent to Ukraine, that they're going to do what Trump threatened to do at the start of his presidency, which is if Putin won't come to the table, he's going to enact these sanctions, because we are going to go to the table with the best hand possible, and because we're making these contributions and because we're planning to continue to support you through this transition process, we believe we should have a table at we should have this prominent role at the negotiating table. But if you're just going to say you foot the bill, we make the decisions, it's going to be difficult to get their participation in future initiatives.
A former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard.
Okay, so this is going to be my problem again and again with this. And again, hypocrisy is the lowest form of criticism. But to hear from the guy who said he wouldn't have certified the 2020 election because Trump refuses to accept the reality that he lost, that he's questioning the democratic dedication of a country like Romania, which is going to have a redo of an election, which is, by the way, what some in the Trump camp had been requesting from his corner after the democratic, fair, open result of Joe Biden's election in 2020. They decide they're going to do that because of Russian influencing through gigantic ad buying and psyoping. And, JD Vance might just see that, oh, it's just a little bit of an ad buy. Who cares, right? He might hand wave it, right? But that is a level of influence that is real, and the delusional bullshit that he talked about that would delay the certification of the vote, stop certification of the vote, send it down to the states, is not real. But he has to accept that in order to be able to be appointed as vice president by Donald Trump. So he has to live in that alternate reality. So like, you can still be like, look, maybe it shouldn't have been annulled. They should have gone through with it anyway. I disagree with the Romanian court for this and that reason, right? We could have that talk. One thing is real though, one thing isn't real, and this is the worst person to be making this point. I would want a Romanian legal expert to be making this point. In fact, by him making this point, I feel like he discredits his cause.
And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those.
Unless you want a position at the FBI or a top intelligence position, then you have to tell the Trump people that the rioters were the real patriots on J6. Real story, real question being out asked of staff trying to apply for these top positions.
Things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends.
There's Klitschko right there, man. He's like trying to figure out the future of his country right now. And he's up there like, Elon Musk is here to save free speech, and you guys are killing it. So please look to Trump, a global free speech leader. Like, the thing is, there's going to be a point here and a point there, or certain instances where I'm going to agree, where it's like, yeah, this law around speech in this country is ridiculous. Yeah, I do believe they should be able to own this gun in that country. Because, like, I'm an American and I have American values around liberty and democracy. But to hear this man come out there after completely denying the results of the election, saying openly he'd be willing to flip it, and then ignoring the Constitution, saying the judges should be ignored, that the legislative process should be ignored because Trump wants him to. I will never be able to listen to him talk like a democratic crusader and take it seriously. Like, as if Assad went up there and he was like, look, we're here to tell the people about the danger of ingesting poisons. Okay, remember to call this number if your child has ingested a rat poison of some. No, I can take it. No, I'm not. I don't believe Assad has the good interest of anyone's health in mind. I don't think he cares.
The United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs.
Basically, a lot of people go and get abortions and these places, and they want to be left alone. But there's people who go there and will be like, stop, you're gonna kill your kid, you weren't. Or they go up and they'll basically like somehow harass them in many instances, to be completely honest with you, while they're trying to get like a pretty private healthcare decision, privately made. A lot of times they don't want that to be really out there, and so some communities and some countries have put into place laws that like make it so you can't do that. You have to be far away. Now this of course can also obstruct like somebody's like peaceful right to protest, and so this is where you get the clash. But this is where the motivation comes from, if anybody's interested.
To the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe.
This is the thing. They've lied so much and so consistently that as somebody covering them, I feel so tired to be like, oh, should I go Google if this is true? That anybody that was close enough to an abortion clinic isn't allowed to pray in their bedroom. Like, oh, that feels like a reasonable law for them to enforce. And I wonder how many people got arrested and like persecuted for this law. And we have any court document. Should I look? Should I attempt to look? Eating the dogs, eating the cats. Should I really? My God, like AI fact checking. Somebody unironically get me Gronk, man. Get me Gronk. Gronk AI live chat program to review this.
Free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China.
Oh our own government. Who gives a fuck, dude? You're at the Munich Security Conference. You're at the Munich Security Conference. If you go up there and say, freedom of expression is important. We believe in countries, you've been and like move on. What is this fucking drag on and on and on and on and on and on and on, man? This is like your moment to show your chops in the foreign policy realm. And now we're talking about COVID. And we're talking about like people getting banned off of Twitter for what they posted about C-19. Like what you're at the Munich Security. Why are you talking about that even domestic whatever?
Encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Unless it's directed towards the President of the United States, then we will open up the libel laws. It's like 18 clap.
Now we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency.
So don't even, of all the people to say this is like Trump going out there like, you know, election denial is a real problem, and you know, people won't accept the truth that, you know, they lost or something. Like, you know, if you don't accept if you don't accept when you lose, like, shut up, just shut up. Literally anyone else, shut up.
Burns is an
and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some...
By the way, Donald Trump right now, as he speaks, is suing a pollster in Iowa for giving him a polling result he didn't like, and it was an inaccurate polling result. But his accusation is that this was meant to influence the result of the election, and so now he's suing her to punish her. Like, Donald Trump does not care. The administration you represent does not care. He tried to cancel the results of the election. He tried to do that. Even after the results went through, he then just said, suspend the results entirely. Don't even do a redo. You know what's happening in Romania? They're going to have another election with the same candidates that were on the ballot. And so if you want to still vote for Georgescu, you can still go out. You can vote for Georgescu. You can still go out there and do that if you want to. After the election was over, you know what Trump said? He said, suspend the Constitution, remove Biden from office, and install him. And he said that the suspension of the Constitution should be permanent. He asked for the permanent suspension of the U.S. Constitution. He's the Republican candidate for president. Now he's a Republican president. You can't be here and say this and then expect to be taken seriously. It's not a surprise he wasn't taken that warmly. Of all the people to give this lecture, he is the worst person.
Some perspective. You can believe it's wrong.
We should get George Santos up there next to give a lecture on honesty.
Wrong for Russia to buy social media
Trump on modesty.
Advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now,
and if our democracy can be destroyed just by the president saying, making the DOJ just not enforce the laws, that means we didn't have a particularly strong democracy either. Oh, God. My goodness.
The good news.
Scary meme, though. That fear scenario really scares me.
Is that I have...
But that was like, there was like 5 people clapping there. I don't see a single hand moving.
Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion. Or
Soviet-era words, misinformation and disinformation. What is this bizarre bullshit? Misinformation, if you say that, actually, that's the scary, spooky thing, because you're accusing people of, no, you're not allowed. That's actually authoritarian. That's Soviet. That's like Stalin. When you say people lie to benefit their own interests purposely and spread it amongst the public to your own country's detriment, that's Marxisms. What's the purpose of putting Soviet era? These are words that have modern connotations in meanings. It's just, you're just putting the word Soviet on it to make it scary.
or, God forbid, vote.
Yes, there are people who spread misinformation. There are government projects specifically designed to spread misinformation amongst the public. There have been American projects to spread misinformation about Chinese COVID vaccinations in Asia. There have been Russian misinformation projects to try to influence American elections and Moldovan elections and a lot of elections, actually. These are real things. Should we just pretend they're not real because Trump also happens to lie at a higher percentage than the misinformation psyops?
Different way, or even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target.
Yes, and instead of that, we're the reason we're not talking about that is because that's not Vance's expertise. He doesn't know anything about that. What he does know about, is blowing out a bunch of hot air on all the bullshit talking points that he's been saying on the campaign trail all up to this point. And so it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff on the campaign trail. I don't know if you guys expect anything different, but we're not going to get anything different from JD Vance. He's as inexperienced on foreign policy issues as he was in the Senate after a single term. Not even a full single term.
And that's great, because as President Trump has
been a full single term, I think it was 2018. It might be a full single term, or just about.
Made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also...
Okay, but you cannot open with, we care so much about European security, and then say we need to go focus somewhere else. It's one thing to say you have limited resources and so you can only dedicate so much. But when you right out of the gate open up your negotiations with, NATO membership, I don't know about that. Wait, we're talking about getting back all Ukrainian land? I don't know about that. American troops in Ukraine to deter a future invasion? If you're just opening up like that, you're not even asking for the Russians to give you something, it really feels like you're not treating it like a priority. It seems like you want the prioritization of American interests from Europe, but you don't want to prioritize European interests whatsoever. You don't want the yin and yang of the Euro-Atlantic relationship. Somebody just put a comment in chat. Broody said, "Hi, I'm German, and after JD's speech, I took down my American flag from the wall. I have always been and will continue to be a great admirer of the USA for many reasons. I've long seen your country as a pioneer of freedom, greatness, and prosperity. I'm deeply grateful that the USA liberated Germany from the Nazis in 1945. However, today I find myself deeply concerned, as it feels like we're heading in the opposite direction. May we find reasoning again soon." And then a little American flag emoji. Well, thank you very much. Welcome to the stream. That was a first-time comment. You don't need to take the flag down. I hope the flag doesn't God, JD Vance represents the United States. I mean, it's true, he does represent the United States. But God, when I see the flag, I try to think of something else besides this guy's face. My goodness.
Also ask you, how will you even begin?
Look, JD Vance said Trump was like heroin for America, and you guys better be ready to find out what an OD feels like.
To think through the kinds of budgeting questions.
Don't choke on your own vomit.
If we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place. I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important?
Really? This is what we're at? It's like, well, the Russians are invading Ukraine. It's the largest war in Europe since World War II. Millions on the march. You know, we were just on the campaign trail saying World War III could break out at any moment and everyone's going to blow up, which was their pitch. That they're going to end the war in 24 hours because it's such a risk. He gets in there and he's like, I think the first priority is what's in our hearts. What is freedom. Look, throughout Europe, there are many different problems when it comes to civil liberties, just like there is in any other continent in the world, right? I would say it's probably in some areas more developed than other continents, and there's some, unity in certain political traditions and beliefs, at least more so than other portions of the world when it comes to, for example, liberal democratic values as we understand them. But you're choosing this moment to say that the priority is soul searching. Look, it's always a good moment to improve, but you're at a security conference, okay? You're at a security conference. The discussion isn't going to be about public financing of elections. The discussion is going to be about the largest war in Europe since World War II. It's going to be about the serious security priorities. It's not going to be about the cultural, half of them, it just seems like cultural issues of the day. I mean, is this really it? He goes to a security conference during the largest war in Europe since World War II, and he decides to make it about, hey guys, make it easier for abortion protesters at abortion clinics. Hey guys, I believe that it is wrong how they handled the Romanian election influencing fallout. And so therefore, I believe you guys need to stop with this. You need to treat elections more fairly. And we're just going to talk about security. Talk about security. You know how he said, hey, talk to a lot of you guys about what you guys are, your security interests. It'd have been good to hear like a second about that. Wait, did he just yap about DEI? I haven't heard DEI yet. But please, anything but.
And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis...
And also, it's hard for me to believe that, his main problem with Europe is a problem of democratization when, the Trump admin's, favorite European partner is Viktor Orban. Come on.
I believe we all face together is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results?
Well, like executive orders and challenges to the basic foundation of the Constitution, like the checks and balance systems or judicial system. Executive orders that could just immediately be undone because you don't have the legislative majority to accomplish anything. That would be a problem.
But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy...
It was such a big mandate, that election. Hillary won by a larger margin in 2016. Not a mandate. It was Trump's mandate. Trump wins by smaller margin than Hillary. 2024, biggest mandate of a century. Huge. It's almost Reagan numbers.
Competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail.
I'm looking at how many people were not paying attention. Most of them are paying attention. Most of them are still listening. They don't seem pleased. A few looking out at their phones, though. Also paying attention.
Whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions.
Trump threatened the broadcasting rights of those who he thinks gives unfair coverage of him. It's just so... Come on. You can only take this seriously for a second if you don't know anything about Trump's domestic views towards the press.
Like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, Almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker.
I'm hearing, like, I heard maybe like one solid round of applause at the very beginning, and the rest of this has been received very coldly.
Often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates.
Now it's a shared civilization?
To millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit and agreed.
Why would we apply a 25% tariff on our shared civilization?
Disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns.
This is not for this crowd. This is not for this crowd at all. This is completely meant for a domestic American audience. This is, I'm sorry, like I just sorry to cut to the chase, but this entire speech is meant to be clipped and shipped on Twitter, meant to be clipped and shipped in maybe some like YouTube short or like shorts program, and have different moments broadcasted on American cable news. This and maybe alt media programs. This is not meant for the people in that room. This is not meant for much of the European community outside of the base of the right, which aligns themselves with the Trumpian movement. But this feels largely aimed towards an American audience.
Or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy...
Companies hiding their origin and buying mass ads to manipulate the results of an election, that they're not part of the country. No, that's a little different than, I'm going to give my opinion from Berlin. A little different. Like starting, for example, misinformation factories to spread lies about candidates that benefit the strategic interests of your country. A little different than if I was to go on Twitter and say, I don't like this Le Pen gal.
democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what German democracy...
I'm sorry, what?
And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what German democracy, what no democracy, America...
Painful. It's just painful. And what's the point? That they're both really fucking annoying? Is the joke that Elon's very annoying? Because that's the joke about Thunberg, right? Is that she's annoying. So is the joke that they're both very annoying? Is that a dig at Elon? Who is this a dig at? One's the richest person on the planet. The other was a schoolgirl.
American, German, or European will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little.
2020.
As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Okay, this was a really big missed opportunity to me. Not only was JD Vance the worst person to be making these arguments due to the administration he's tied to, what he said he wanted to do around the democratic results of the 2020 election, what he wants to do with the checks and balances system and the courts when the court says something is unconstitutional, whether it's Article 1 of the Constitution and the power of the purse, whether it has to do with birthright citizenship and how, people become citizens in this country, or any other fundamental parts of our country that you would need a 2/3 majority to change. That, that's the historical standard in order to get constitutional change in the House and Senate, but he doesn't have those majorities, so just scrap the judicial branch altogether. And now he's gonna waltz in there acting like Captain America here to save democracy in Europe. I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. It's hard to listen to. It's like listening to, Ponzi talk about financial responsibility and integrity. It's like, I just don't trust it. It's impossible to trust. And the other thing is, I feel like he stayed in his comfort zone in this speech. This is Vance's really first big foreign policy showing, right? He hasn't really shown himself on the foreign policy stage before. JD Vance doesn't have really any foreign policy experience up to this point. JD Vance is going into this head first at the Munich Security Conference at a point where this moment should be used for, say, hey, we got $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority. We're going to send that over to Ukraine to add more pressure on the Russians, let them know that we're serious about the fact that if they don't come to the table, we will continue to supply Ukraine, as well as helping Ukraine hold out better now because we want them to have as much land in the best defensive position possible. And then I'm going to pair it with the actualized threat that Donald Trump made about increasing sanctions at the start of his presidency. to make it clear that Donald Trump's words are serious and he is not somebody who's joking around, despite how ridiculous he is as in every single way about his character. Like that, you know, if he came and he took the Munich Security Conference to be like, boom, we're going to take this decision with presidential dominant authority. Boom, we're going to take this decision with sanctions. And then we're going to work together, since we're going to pivot out of the region, to find a long-term solution in a stable region for Europe. Because if you pivot out of the Middle East, you want the Saudis and the Israelis to take your place. That was the American plan. But you can't do that plan unless you take Saudi interests and Israeli interests in consideration, so that they'll agree with your plan. They'll agree with your system, with the chess pieces you put in order. So if you pivot out of Europe and you don't take European security interests into consideration, they're not going to take your interests into consideration. And so you can't just come here for your first showing of your foreign policy chops, just go out there, treat it like it's Fox and Friends, and be like, well, at least I'm going to look based on social media. This is not about looking based on social media. Once you leave the continental United States and you go out there, you're a foreign diplomat representing the United States. People are not only looking at you as a representative of the United States, people are looking at you as possibly the future president of the country, either if Donald Trump croaks or if you win an election in 4 years. And this is all you could amount. This is what you decided to focus on. Instead of showing yourself to be credible and serious on the issue of foreign policy, you just kind of graze over it like, oh, a lot of you guys while I was here talked to me about security issues, but you know, we need to deal with the soul within. And like, it's just so hard to take seriously. It's just so hard to take seriously. If you don't treat the Europeans like they are a security priority, like you said at the start that they are, like it's of interest to the United States, then don't be surprised if you don't treat you like one. We should not be sending this rookie politician venture capitalist to play podcast at the Munich conference. We should be using the opportunity, not scrapping it like we just did. Ay.